In today's video, we will be studying the answer to the question, is having Imaan, belief, enough for us to attain the rewards which God has promised us in this world and in the hereafter? Assalamu alaikum, I'm Munib Ali. Welcome to another video on the Qur'an study channel. So as I said, today we will be studying the answer to this question. Is having Imaan sufficient for us to achieve what God has promised us in this life and in the hereafter? Now, obviously, it's very important for us to understand what Imaan means first of all. And we did a video last week to study what Imaan means. Now, if you haven't seen last week's video, please go over to our YouTube channel and have a look, because it is really important to understand what Imaan really means per the Qur'an. But let me summarize what we studied. We studied these 5 segments of Imaan. Those 5 segments of Imaan were the belief in God, the belief in all the prophets without any distinction between them, and we pondered over whether in practice we followed that commandment. Belief in all God's revelations, those in the Qur'an and in the books that were revealed before the Qur'an, the Malaika, and we studied the meaning of Malaika, and the day of judgment, that we will be judged for our actions on that particular day. And then we studied the definition of Imaan, that it is a conviction, in fact, based on knowledge and evidence that we fully accept mentally and we fully understand. We studied the 2 steps in order to obtain such conviction. Step 1 being that we must receive the evidence. That was step 1. And step 2 was to use our minds to process that evidence, to see the logic, and to use our reason to understand the signs which Allah has given us that prove beyond doubt these 5 segments that we studied. And importantly, we pondered over the fact that blind faith is not Imaan. And also remember, I said that we were going to be using this study sheet to pull together our understanding from the Qur'an of these very important concepts: Imaan, submission, and righteous deeds. And we were completing this study sheet together. And where we got to the last time, when we studied what Imaan means, was this. We completed the left-hand side of this study sheet, the 5 segments of Imaan, which I just summarized, and the definition of Imaan, which I also just summarized. Okay, so now let's get to today's question. Is Imaan sufficient? In order to answer this question, I like to refer to the example of Iblis, of Shaitan, Satan, because Allah describes something about Iblis which is very useful for us in understanding the answer to this question. So let's have a look at 3 verses. The first one is Surah Al-A'raf, which is 7 verse 12. Now, before I go into this, actually, all of these 3 verses are about a conversation that is happening between Allah and Iblis. And this is metaphorical, it's a parable, but what we are looking for is the lessons within these metaphorical verses. So, Surah Al-A'raf, number 7, verse 12. God said, and he's saying this to Iblis, by the way, "What stopped you from being subservient when I ordered you?" Said he, Iblis, "I am better than he. You created me from fire and created him from clay." Now let's look at verse 14. He appealed. This is Iblis. He appealed. "Give me respite until the day they are raised up." Now, the reason I wanted us to have a look at these verses is because there are 2 important things for us to learn in relation to the question we're looking to answer today. The first is that Iblis acknowledged and knew there was a God, and that is why he's having a conversation with God. He knows there is a God, so he believes in a God. That's number 1. Number 2, he also believes in the day of judgment. That is why he refers in verse 14 to the day that they are raised up. So you see how interesting these two verses are and how we've learnt two things about Iblis, albeit metaphorically. Now let's look at this third verse, which is Surah Al-Baqarah, which is number 2, verse 34. And when we said to the Malaika, be subservient to Adam, so they became subservient, except Iblis, who refused out of arrogance, and became of those who reject the truth, Al-Kafirin. So, let's now ponder over this. So what is it we can take from this verse that tells us that despite Iblis knowing that there is a God, and despite him believing in the Day of Judgment, what did he do wrong? How can you categorize his action? Have a think. It is rebellion. Iblis rebelled. That is where he went wrong. So it's really important for us to know that once we have Imaan, we should not rebel. Okay, so what is the opposite of rebellion? It is submission. Submission is the opposite of rebellion. And this is what we must do. Now, before we move on, I want you to keep in mind the word rebellion, because I'm going to come back to it in this study. So don't forget rebellion. So next, let's go back to our study sheet and see what this tells us. What this tells us is that Imaan and submission are linked. They go hand in hand. Imaan and submission. In fact, what I would say is that Imaan is the root of submission. Because let's think, you need to know that there is a God, a master, to submit to. So knowing and believing in God is a root for us to submit to God. Having Imaan, believing in the revelations, is a root for us to submit to the commandments in those revelations. So the way I see it is that Imaan is the root of submission, and both of these things, Imaan and submission, go hand in hand. They are both important for us. Remember, Iblis did not submit. Even though he knew that there was a God, even though he knew there is a day of judgment. Now the question is, what is submission? What do we have to submit to? For that, let's have a look at what Allah tells us in the Qur'an. Let's look at Surah Al-Araf, which is chapter 7, and have a look at verse 3. And we're only going to look at the very first part of this verse. It says, Ittabi'u ma unzila ilaykum min rabbikum. Follow what has been revealed to you by your Lord. Now, what has been revealed to us by our Lord? Have a think. It is, of course, the Qur'an. So to submit means to follow the Qur'an. The Qur'an is the basis of our submission. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Okay, if you're ready, let's move on a little bit further. So submission, what are the actions which are required to submit? Now we can look at this in the context of righteous deeds. Now, do you remember we did 2 videos explaining in detail what righteous deeds are? Amalan Salihan. Again, if you do not remember or if you have not seen those videos, please do go over to our YouTube channel to take a look. I'm not going to go through it in detail here, but in summary, what we studied was that righteous deeds are where we fulfill the needs of the needy without discrimination. In other words, it doesn't matter who the other person is, what their beliefs are, what their gender might be, what their race might be. If we find individuals that have a need, fulfilling that need is important. But not just in any way. It's really fundamentally about bringing people's potential to the fore restoring balance. So we gave examples in our videos about, somebody who's very capable but lacks education, helping that person obtain the education so that they can stand on their feet and bring value to their society. For example, is Amalan Swalihan. Helping to bring back balance of those people who are able to use their capabilities and those who are not. Bringing that balance back. We discussed the importance of the motive being to submit and not for the purpose of personal gains. And we also discussed that the contribution is important, not just with our wealth, but with our other capabilities, physical capabilities, our verbal capabilities. Now, the thing to understand is that there is another category apart from righteous deeds, and these are all the other instructions contained in God's revelations in the Qur'an. And the Qur'an contains instructions and guidance for every topic you can think about which affect us on a day-to-day basis. All of our daily affairs, whether they be social affairs, our family, economic, political, commercial, if we are under attack in a war, how to manage our wealth and our possessions. The Qur'an contains guidance about everything and instructions about everything. So when we talk about submission and actions, we must think about not just righteous deeds, but everything else which is contained in the Qur'an. Now here is a question for you. What is the word that describes the obeying of these instructions? The word is Ibaadah. This is Ibaadah. Following these instructions is Ibaadah. Now, let's just stop and ponder for a minute. Is this what Muslims generally understand to be the meaning of the word Ibaadah? When people say, "Are you doing Ibaadah?" do they think about the following of instructions in relation to commerce or politics or social life? I raise that as an open question. Let me know what you think in the comment section of our YouTube channel. Okay, now let's go back to our study chart. Let's write down a little bit more. So here's where we got to, and now we know that submission, when it comes to the actions, it contains these different categories. And you can see how our chart is becoming further enriched with this information. So we've looked at Imaan, and now we've looked at the actions which come under submission. But wait, there's more. It's not quite complete yet. There's a bit more space on this chart. So let's think about these actions just a little bit more. When we think about righteous deeds and all of these other instructions and guidance which we're following, all of this is about the goodness of actions. Okay? The goodness of actions. But the thing is, Allah does not require us just to undertake goodness of actions. It is also about the goodness of the actor, the person who is undertaking these actions, the submitter. There is also something to be done about us as individuals. Submission is not just about the actions, it is also about the person doing the actions, the actor. So it's two-dimensional. Now the question which should arise in your mind is, okay, well, what is that? What does Allah require from us in relation to the submitter? And that we will study in the next video. It's really important to understand that in order to complete this picture, to complete this chart. Now there are three very interesting particular things we're going to be looking at in next week's video. Number one, the rebellious spirit. Remember I said, keep your mind on this word rebellion. We're going to be talking about the rebellious spirit. Number two, we're going to talk about the heart and soul. And number three, we will conclude on the meaning of the word Muslim. And all of these things will come together and this chart will be completed. And I'm sure you're going to find it very interesting. So please make sure you subscribe to our channel and have a look at the video we will launch next week. And before I go, the last thing for me is, look, please, if you found this video useful, click on like and subscribe. because it really helps our channel, and keep your comments and questions coming in. They're really useful for us too. Until next week, Assalamu alaikum.
أفلا يتدبرون القرآن